You wake in the dark and the stone beneath you is wet. Not water, thicker than that. Your hands stick to it when you move. The air reeks of iron, mould, and something sweet gone rotten. You try to sit up, but your head spins. Your wrist burns where the chain rubbed it raw in your sleep, though sleep doesn't feel like the right word. You are unconscious, or pretending. It doesn't matter. There are bones in the corner, small ones, curved like they once held up a girl who dreamed of something gentler than this. The door hasn't opened in days, you think. Time doesn't work down here. Sometimes the sounds of the castle trickle through the stone, boots on tile, a scream that ends too quickly. But mostly it's quiet. You're not the first. That much is obvious. You've heard the others, the ones who begged, the ones who went silent. The girl next to you died 2 nights ago. Her skin had turned blue by morning. They say the Countess is beautiful. Skin white as snow, hair black as night, lips like berries. That's the version in the castle. That's the version people sing about in the kitchens. But the truth is something else. You saw her once. Just once. She came in barefoot in a white dress stained brown. She knelt beside a girl with red hair and whispered, "Don't scream." Then she opened the girl's stomach with a knife. The red-haired girl didn't scream. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. You haven't made a sound since, because here in the cellar, silence is the only thing that keeps you alive, and even that might not be enough. She was born into power. That's where it starts. Not in the cellar, not in the blood, but in silk sheets, between stone walls warmed by fire and family name. Elizabeth Bathory, born 1560, in the Kingdom of Hungary, a daughter of 2 lines too proud to fail and too rotten to notice when they did. The Bathorys were warriors, judges, voivodes, cousins to kings. Her uncle was a cardinal, her aunt was rumoured to be a witch. The bloodline was ancient and twisted, curled tight with inbreeding. Madness ran in it like a vein of silver in stone. Even as a child, Elizabeth knew she was different. Not weaker, stronger, smarter, colder. She watched other children cry when servants beat them. She didn't. She learned how to lie before she could write. She found joy in small, cruel things, how ants burn under glass, how a pin carefully placed could make a maid limp for days. She was promised in marriage before her 10th birthday. Her husband, Ferenc Nadasdy, was older, noble, and gone most of the time. A soldier, often at war, rarely at home. When he was home, he showed her things, torture techniques used on the battlefield, how to make a man scream without killing him. He called them lessons. He brought her a gift once, a glove lined with spikes. She used it on a servant girl, then another. Then she asked for more gloves. No one stopped her. She managed vast estates in his absence, hundreds of peasants, dozens of staff. She punished failure like it was treason, a missing stitch, a dirty chamber pot, a side glance. She saw disobedience everywhere, and punishment became ritual. They whispered it. Even then, the Countess does not forgive. The Countess watches everything. The Countess likes to hurt people, but she was noble, and nobles could not be monstrous. Not in public, not yet. She bore children, and they were raised far away. The house needed to be quiet, ordered, clean. The staff was rotated constantly. No girl stayed too long. No one was allowed too close, and she aged. Slowly, strangely. Her skin stayed pale, her lips red. She didn't change the way others did. She claimed good herbs, clean air, prayer. But the girls in the village began to disappear. First the desperate ones, the poor, the homeless, the ones with no names, then the prettier ones, then daughters of servants, then daughters of minor nobles. She built a fortress of silence around her. Inside it, something monstrous began to grow. The carriage ride to Sava Castle felt like a procession to a throne. She was 15, veiled in velvet, surrounded by banners stitched with the Bathory sigil. It was not a wedding, it was a coronation. The peasants bowed as she passed. They did not cheer. They knew what kind of union this was. Ferenc Nadasti was not a kind man. He was not meant to be. They called him the Black Knight of Hungary. He had impaled men and left them writhing for birds to eat. He had once sewn a Turkish prisoner inside a dying horse to watch him suffocate. These were not rumours. These were facts he laughed about over wine. He taught her everything he knew. Which plants slowed the pulse without killing, which body parts bled most freely. How pain makes the mouth lie or confess. They were not tender with each other, but they were equals in their way. She did not flinch at the stories. She asked questions. He gave answers. He went to war. She stayed home and ruled. The castle was hers now. She reorganised everything, staff, ledgers, punishments. She wrote in precise Hungarian and Latin, with a hand so elegant it made cruelty look graceful. Her letters to Ferenc were filled with battlefield strategies, instructions for their land, and veiled little jokes. In one, she described a girl who disrespected her by dropping a tray of bread. "I taught her grace," she wrote, "with needles." When Ferenc returned, he brought her gifts. A whip woven from horsehair, a maid trained to scream on cue. The Countess kept both. Together they held court over lands soaked in blood and grain. Their subjects feared them more than the Ottomans. Crops were taken, taxes doubled. One winter, starving peasants approached the castle walls pleading for scraps. Elizabeth ordered the gates shut. She watched from a balcony, sipping warm wine as they froze. They had children, but not many. Some lived, some didn't. They were never seen for long. The staff said the Countess wept when her son died, but her face never changed. The marriage lasted a decade and more. But Ferenc began to falter. Old injuries from the battlefield rotted his legs. He grew slower, dimmer, and one day, in the middle of another campaign, he died. No one saw the body. Elizabeth did not mourn. She became the sole mistress of his wealth, the estates, the soldiers, the law, and she was no longer just a wife. She was a ruler, alone, absolute, unwatched. The chamber was not on any blueprint. It did not exist in the Countess's records or estate inventories. Servants whispered of it, but no one could say where it was. Only that the girls who entered did not return. It was said to be hidden behind a wall in the northern tower, beyond the stone library past a door carved with animal teeth. No guards stood outside. None were needed. The locks were inside, the kind that sealed the room from within. The Countess called it her sanctuary. Inside, the light never reached full brightness. Only candles, placed carefully in iron sconces, casting uneven flickers across velvet and stone. The room was clean, almost obsessively so. No cobwebs, no dust. The floor scrubbed with vinegar. The bed linens white. The tub in the centre was deep and round, carved from solid black marble, polished until it shone like oil. On one wall hung instruments, silver needles in neat rows, polished scissors, a length of silk rope. A book lay always open on a table, its pages stained with age and something darker. Some said it was written in a language no one alive could read. Elizabeth read it aloud. She brought the girls herself. Sometimes she chose them from villages. Sometimes they were gifts from local nobles, an apology or a bribe. They were never older than 16, usually younger. She gave them fruit, wine, soft fabric to wear. She spoke to them gently, as a mother might. Sometimes she bathed them first. Sometimes she asked them to sing. Then she changed. When the pain began, she studied their faces, as though trying to read some truth beneath the skin. She whispered prayers, or incantations no one knew. The girls screamed, and the walls took their sound like lungs. The servants said she bathed in blood, but that wasn't quite right. She didn't immerse herself. She caught it, in bowls, in cloth, on her skin. She rubbed it onto her face slowly as though painting. One maid who escaped said the Countess smiled only when blood touched her lips. That was when her eyes lit up, when she seemed truly alive. They said she believed it made her skin glow, that it stopped age, that beauty could be stolen from dying girls and worn like a perfume. Others whispered that it wasn't about youth, it was pleasure, control. The feeling of another life ending under her hands. She didn't always kill them. Some she hurt, then healed, then hurt again. A cycle, a ritual. Their screams part of the rhythm of her days. Afterward, she walked barefoot to her private chamber, her dress sticky, her skin slick. She changed herself, washed, redressed. She joined the household again as though nothing had happened. She sat at the table, wrote letters, kissed her children good night. The next morning she walked the grounds with a parasol. She greeted peasants, collected rent, discussed wool prices with local magistrates. Her skin glowed, they said, as if lit from within. They were never missed at first. The girls came from the outer villages, small, nameless places where homes were made of mud and bark and winters could bury the living. Their parents were farmers, herders, millers. Their names weren't written anywhere. Their lives were barter. A neighbour might notice an empty seat at the fire. A sister might stare longer at the doorway waiting, but no one questioned it. Girls vanished. They married. They left for service. They died in childbirth. That was the way of things, until they didn't return. At first, the family said nothing. Who would they speak to? The Countess was nobility. Her carriages rolled through the hills like the will of God. Her seals carried more weight than any man in the county. To accuse her was to spit into a storm. But there were patterns, whispers, the same pale horses coming through the same muddy roads, the same steward knocking at each door, the same promises, employment, clean beds, good food. Lady Bathory needs a chambermaid, they said, or a companion for her daughters. She likes polite girls, pretty girls, girls who bled. They were gone before the sun finished rising. Some didn't even say goodbye. The promise of a better life silenced fear. But weeks passed, then months, and the letters stopped coming. In one village, a mother walked barefoot in the snow to the castle. She waited outside the gates for 3 days. No one let her in. On the 4th morning, her body was found near the forest line. Face turned to the ground, her knuckles scraped raw from knocking. Some said she froze, others said she was silenced. In another village, 2 sisters left together. Only one returned. She didn't speak. Her hair had been cut. Her wrists bore rings of bruises. She wouldn't let anyone touch her. She slept with her back to the wall and screamed when the door creaked open. She died before spring. They said she swallowed crushed glass from the apothecary's cabinet. In still another town, 4 girls were taken in 1 month. The priest began writing down names in his Bible margins. He called them the lost. By the time he died, the list spanned 2 pages. The rumours bled outward like rot in a well. They said Countess Bathory was a witch, that she sacrificed girls to demons, that she drank their blood to keep her womb fertile, that she was building an army of ghosts. The truth was worse. It wasn't a ritual. It wasn't war. It was pleasure, layered over power. Girls became objects. Their screams became background noise. Their lives unspooled into crimson just to keep a noblewoman entertained. She told the parents she would teach them manners. She taught them how to suffer quietly. Inside the castle, the process was practiced, predictable. A servant escorted the girl to a chamber where she was stripped and bathed. A tunic was laid out. She was told to kneel. She was told to smile. The Countess often watched from a chair in the corner. She didn't speak at first. She let the silence settle. She studied the girl. Sometimes she'd ask for her name, then she'd change it. The name didn't matter. It wouldn't be used again. The first wound came small, a scratch, a slap, then a needle. then something sharper. The girl cried, and the sound filled the stone like music. Some fought, they were beaten. Some screamed, they were gagged. Some begged. Those were her favourite. In the morning, the blood was scrubbed away. The clothes were burned, the tools boiled, and the next girl was brought in. The death itself was never acknowledged. No priest, no burial, no grave. Their bodies were hidden beneath floorboards, behind false walls, or dumped in the woods where wolves would finish the work. One guard said he burned 12 in a single week. Another claimed the dogs at Chakteach refused to eat for days. Their names were never recorded, their birthdays forgotten, their lives turned into rumour, but they existed. You can still feel them in the walls, not as ghosts but as weight. A silence too thick for a castle full of life. They were never meant to be remembered, which is why we must. She didn't always kill them. Some girls were spared, not out of mercy but calculation. They were too bruised to be useful, too broken to amuse, or simply survived longer than expected. These were the ones sent away, sometimes with coin, sometimes with nothing but scars. They were the ones who told the stories, but no one wanted to believe them. Imagine being that girl, 15 years old, limping barefoot through snow with your mouth swollen shut. You knock on the church door at midnight, your breath white in the air, blood still drying under your nails. You try to speak, your voice fails. So you lift your tunic, show them what she did, the branding, the lash marks, the places where fingernails were torn away, and the priest. He steps back, he tells you to pray, he asks what you did to deserve it, he tells you not to speak of this again. The village is small, everyone talks, everyone hears. They see you now as something unclean, even cursed, not a victim, a warning. They avert their eyes when you walk by. Some whisper that you tempted the Countess, that your beauty brought it on, that you should feel lucky she didn't kill you outright. They don't understand. No one wants to. Because if your story is true, then their world is broken. Their order of nobility and God shattered. It's easier to pretend you're mad. You begin to think maybe you are. But some women held on, not to justice. That was too distant, but to the truth. Kata was one of them. A kitchen girl, daughter of a blacksmith. She remembered names. She remembered rooms. She remembered the copper tub, where blood collected like wine after a slaughter. She spoke to anyone who'd listen. Once, twice, again. She was beaten for it, called a liar. But she didn't stop. Years later, when the trial came, her testimony would be used. Her words, scrawled by a clerk who didn't meet her eyes, would help make history remember. There was another, unnamed, a maid who limped into a tavern after escaping through a sewer grate. Her face had been cut so many times the flesh didn't heal evenly. But she told her story to a soldier, then to a magistrate, then again and again, until someone finally wrote it down. She said the castle stank of iron, that she heard girls begging not to be bathed, that she watched the Countess pour hot wax into a girl's ear just to hear the way she screamed, and the court asked, did she drink their blood? The girl hesitated, then whispered, yes. That word rippled outward, through chambers, through towns, through history. No one could ever prove it, not fully, but they didn't need to. The stories had their own power. One girl said the Countess bit her flesh until she passed out. Another said she was forced to watch as her sister was strangled, then kissed on the lips by the Countess afterward. The details shift. Memory blurs, but the shape of the horror never changes. The survivors weren't believed, not at first, but they remembered. That was enough. They carved the truth into history one word at a time, and each of them paid for it. Some vanished before they could testify. Others died in childbirth or illness, or what the record politely called misadventure. But some stories slipped through the cracks, into records, into rumours, into us. They were never just girls. They were witnesses. They were warnings. And their stories are why we know what happened behind those stone walls in the dead of winter when the snow fell silent and the dogs wouldn't bark. Because some of them made it out alive. The villagers believed she couldn't die. They whispered it behind shutters and under breath when the wind howled through the Carpathian trees and no one dared walk past the castle walls after dusk. Elizabeth Bathory had gone beyond cruelty. She had become something else, not a woman, a legend, a monster. They said she bathed in virgin blood, that it softened her skin, that it stopped time, that she stood before her mirror, crimson still dripping from her elbows, admiring how smooth her cheeks looked afterward. They said she drank it from goblets, rubbed it into her breasts, licked it from her fingers like honey. Some believed she'd made a pact, that Satan had offered her a choice, age or beauty. She chose beauty and paid with other people's lives. But that was the myth. The truth was worse. She was aging. The mirror didn't lie. The lines had begun to show, especially around her mouth, pulled tight from too much smiling at pain. Her appetite was growing, not shrinking. No act seemed enough. Each girl left her emptier than the last. She had doctors, of course, alchemists, men who muttered over powders and tinctures and told her she would live forever if she just kept her blood clean and her nerves stimulated. So she bled the young and watched them die. She listened to their final gasps like music. She told herself it was medicine, and still her body betrayed her. There were no candles that masked the smell of rot, no rouge that hid the rawness beneath her fingernails, no powder that concealed the madness in her eyes. But still, she chased immortality like a starving animal, not through poetry, not through legacy, through violence, through ritual, through death. She had portraits painted that showed her forever young. She rewrote her birth records to seem closer to 30 than 40. She dismissed maids who mentioned the word wrinkles and whipped servants who forgot to call her beautiful. She believed she could trap youth like a bird in a cage. And then came the stories of others trying to imitate her, of lesser nobles drowning girls in rivers, peasants caught with knives and no explanations. She had become contagious, but none of them had her precision, because Elizabeth didn't kill to survive. She killed to be eternal. And in a way, she succeeded. 4 centuries later, we still speak her name. She didn't find immortality in blood. She found it in fear. The doors to Chactich Castle were never locked from the inside. They didn't have to be. No girl ever escaped. But outside, the cracks had started forming. Too many families had begun asking questions. Too many daughters sent to the castle for service never wrote home. No bodies, no letters, no wages returned. Just silence. At first, the Countess deflected. She blamed illness, accidents. She claimed the girls ran off with soldiers or fell in love with tradesmen and disappeared. She paid some families to stay quiet, threatened others. Many believed her because they wanted to. Who would dare accuse a Bathory? But whispers move faster than walls. A Lutheran priest in the village began preaching sermons with unusual heat. He spoke of sin rotting the nobility. He spoke of evil done behind stone gates. People stopped laughing when he said her name. Then came the royal court. Too many girls gone without trace. Too many rumours. Her enemies, old men with grudges, cousins who coveted her lands, began to circle. They didn't care about justice. They cared about power. But it didn't matter. The result would be the same. A letter was sent. It carried the seal of the king. When it arrived at her castle, the Countess did not flinch. She poured wine. She laughed. She called the accusation slander, lies from peasants and jealous men. She dared them to come. She believed herself untouchable. But the investigator they sent was no fool. Gyuri Thurzo knew what power looked like. He was family, distantly. He brought men with torches and swords, not to fight, but to see. He arrived without warning just after nightfall. They found the girls still breathing, not many, but enough. Naked, chained to walls, some with open wounds, one with her lips sewn shut. The investigators turned white. These were not rumours, not ghost stories. They were facts. And the Countess, she did not run. She stood in the hallway in a red velvet gown, hands clean, smiling frozen. She spoke calmly. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said those girls were thieves, disobedient, liars. She said she was the victim. The guard said nothing, but one girl, too weak to stand, whispered. She laughed while they died. It was enough. Elizabeth Bathory was arrested on her own land. Not dragged, not bound. She was placed under house arrest, a small mercy from a king who feared what a real trial might reveal. She never stood before a jury, never heard the verdict read aloud. But the walls of her fortress, once silent, now whispered her guilt, and the villagers finally spoke her name without fear. The courtroom was packed, but she wasn't there. Elizabeth Bathory, countess, widow, noblewoman, remained locked in her castle tower while the voices of her accusers echoed through the halls of justice. She never stood, never bowed, never answered a single charge. She didn't have to. Others did it for her. They came in shackled, 4 of them, her servants, her shadows, her loyal enforcers, the ones who cleaned the blood, sharpened the blades, dragged the bodies. They didn't deny it. Fitchko, the dwarf who giggled during testimony, Ilona Jor, who had once comforted the girls before the pain started, Dorothea Sentes, cold and blunt, the one who spoke as if it were all just chores, and Katerina, who cried the whole time but didn't deny a word. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as they described the rituals, the torches, the buckets of cold water poured over half-dead girls to wake them for more, the iron pins, the heated tongs, the pleasure. It was methodical, rehearsed, industrial. Names were read, dates, villages, so many missing daughters, and now they had explanations, too many for anyone to spin as accidents. And still, the Countess stayed silent in her tower, writing letters to her sons, pretending she could negotiate her way out. She never confessed. She never explained. The court sentenced her servants to death, brutally. Some were burned. Others had their fingers torn out before execution, a performance meant to signal that justice had been done. But the lady of the house, she was spared. Too noble, too connected, too dangerous to make into a public spectacle. So they bricked her into her room, one small window, no door. She lived that way for nearly 4 years. The once great countess, pacing circles in the dark, scratching at stone, waiting for food to be slid through a crack. No more mirrors, no more baths of blood, only silence and the sound of her own breath. She died in that tower. No priest, no witnesses, just the cold stone that had once protected her, now her tomb. And yet, she was never officially tried, never officially convicted. Her name remained technically untarnished in the noble registers, but the peasants knew, the priests knew, the mothers of the vanished knew. And the castle will never be forgotten,